this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. For the Florida State Sexual Helpline, call 888-956-7273 by contacting the National Hotline at 1-800-656-4673. You can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma, or those who have experienced violence, and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about how to take your power back after a sexual assault. My name is Jenarine. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Education and Prevention Coordinator at the Victim Service Center. With me today, I have Tracy Kelly, who is a sexual assault survivor. Tracy, thank you so much for joining me today. Can you please share with our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Hannah. Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Tracy Kelly. I go by she and her. And I'm a mom to two boys. They're 15 and 13. And I've been married for 16 years now. I have an undergraduate degree in physical education and also a master's degree in education. Before I had kids, I was a teacher, but decided to be a stay-at-home mom with my kids to spend more time with them. We are originally from South Carolina, but we moved here about 6 years ago. Now I am a speaker and advocate for child sexual abuse and mental illness, and I share my story talking about being a child sexual abuse survivor and also dealing with mental illness throughout my life.
Yay, I'm applauding for you. That's for everyone who's listening, wherever you are, give
Yes.
a round of applause. Tracy, thank you so much for sharing. I am so glad that you can be here to talk about your empowerment journey. And just to set the intention for this episode, as I've mentioned, Tracy is a sexual assault survivor, and she is here, ready and willing to share her story and how she was able to cope and recover from this traumatic situation. So Tracy, I first want to start off by asking you, would you like to share a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. Yes, thanks, Hannah. So I was sexually abused from the ages of 9 to 11, and it was abuse done by a family member. He was an older cousin. And I never disclosed my abuse to anyone until I was about 21. So I kept it hidden from pretty much everybody that knew me and knew about me. And just because felt very shamed, very scared, very guilty about what happened. And about the things that were happening that happened to me. I felt like I was dirty, that I felt like I did something horribly wrong, that I was just this horrible person that had this happen. And I felt like it was my fault because I didn't say no, since I knew these things were wrong. So keeping all of that and going through that trauma at such a young age was a really hard time for me to be able to identify and figure out feelings and how I was feeling, and going through adolescence and into adulthood was a very trying time because I was dealing with anxiety and depression and low self-esteem, just feeling like I wasn't worth being loved or worth being cared for. And it wasn't until I was about 21 when I disclosed my abuse. And so at that time, I was still made to be around my abuser. We still had functions together and things like that. And it was really hard because even after I told my parents and my mom what had happened, I was still made to be around him, which was a really hard thing because it just didn't validate what I was feeling and kind of made me feel like I was alone or not, feeling great about the situation. So that was a really hard time. And it really wasn't until I had kids of my own that I started to realize how innocent children really are, and seeing them grow up and just seeing them, I wanted to make sure I was trying to protect them as much as possible. I wanted to protect them from anything happening to them like it happened to me. So, I decided to, right then and there learn how to talk to my kids about sexual abuse, learn how to keep them safe, what to do for them. And by doing that, by reaching out because I wanted to keep my kids safe, it started the chain reaction of me getting help for actually my abuse and being able to feel comfortable with things that had happened to me and going over those things and with a therapist and talking about these things and working through all of the things that happened to me so I could be a better person and I could be a better mom for my kids.
Wow. So, Tracy, you were 9 years old when your child's sexual abuse happened, and you said it was from an older cousin. And from 9 to when you actually told your parents, you were 21. So that is
Correct.
11. No, my math is so wrong. That is like 12 years, I believe. So 12
Yes,
for
that's
12
correct.
years, you were holding in your grief, your pain, your internal struggle, and you said that you knew that it was wrong at the time. And one thing that stood out to me while you were talking was when you told your story and you shared it with your parents, you said that they didn't believe you and that you were still made to be around the perpetrator, your abuser. How did this impact you?
So I think I don't know if they didn't believe me or it was more of I think they didn't understand the scope of it and how serious it actually was.
Mhm.
I think in their heads they were thinking more like, kids show me yours, I'll show you mine kind of thing. I think they thought it was more of like an innocent, kids just being curious kind of thing. So I don't think they really understood a whole like the whole part of really what actually happened. But even still dealing with that and just not feeling like my feelings that I were having had been having my whole life of not being guilty, feeling like it was my fault, that I did something wrong when my parents just still made me be around him and not really kind of take my side and put up for like stand up for me, it just made me feel like okay, it really was my fault. I did something wrong, and it just made it like 10 times worse because I just felt like I really am a bad person. I really did this really horrible thing. Even my parents, can't stand up for me because they know how bad I am. And it really, really affected my self-esteem. Just because and so all these feelings that I was having, I just kept stuffing them down and I didn't want to feel them and, started, just trying to hide. I really just wanted to hide. I didn't want anybody to see me. I didn't want anybody, I just wanted to blend in, be, hidden. I didn't want people to, like talking to people, being in crowds, being around people. I just wanted to blend in. And I began using alcohol as a young age as well, because that was the only way I could just kind of like deal with all of the feelings that I was having.
Wow. I just want to say that when it comes to survivors and for the audience, whoever's listening, it is so important to take what victims, what survivors are saying seriously and believing them. Because this is actually one of the reasons why people, individuals who've experienced child sexual abuse or even sexual assault at an older age, why they don't come forward. So at VSC, we actually did an internal research study. And similar to your story, Tracy, while you waited 12 years, on average, it takes someone 8 to 10 years before they're actually coming forward with their story. And even today, sexual assault and rape is the number one underreported crime. So it's important that we are aware and that if someone feels comfortable enough to share with us what's going on, we listen to them and we become aware of what's happening. We also believe them and try to seek help with them. So, Tracy, what was your turning point? What empowered you and gave you the courage to stand up and say, this isn't right when others around you, including your family, like you said, they didn't really know to the extent about what happened, but at the same time, their responses made you feel like your experience was invalidated. So how are you able to say, no, I'm not going to forget it. I'm not going to sit here and be okay with happened, and I'm not going to continue to see my perpetrator knowing the pain that he caused me.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's such a great point. And going back to like a beginning and what you said is just about validating people and listening to survivors when they speak their story and tell you what happened. It's just such a huge thing that they be believed. And I tell people all the time, like, if like somebody discloses to you an assault or an abuse or something that had happened to them, the first thing should always be said is, I believe you. I
Mhm.
still care about you, and it wasn't your fault. And I think if I would have just heard those words at a very young age, like even at 21 when I disclosed, like I think things would have been so much different. But because I wasn't believed, because I wasn't validated, it did send me down that path of just really bad heartache, like I said, using alcohol to hide, trying to just be somebody that I just wanted to just not be me anymore. Um, and it was a really rough time, and I think for me the validation point came from and I mean, I guess this is a good thing, I'm not sure, but it didn't come until I had kids, until I really felt validated and saw my kids and said, they showed me that unconditional love. When I looked into their eyes, they didn't see me as this person that did this horrible, awful thing. They just saw me as mom who loved them, who didn't have this horrible past or these things happen to them. And it really just made me open up and realize like, this is the person that I am, and I just wanted to be better for my kids. And my kids were my breaking point. I remember around this time when my kids were young, um, my mom was still planning family reunions and functions and things like that. We were from a southern household, and we lived in the southern life, and family is always big, and oh, we got to do family and family this, and so my mom would try to still schedule all kinds of family functions. And I remember she scheduled one family event and a family reunion, and it was the first time my kids were going to be around him. He was going to be there with his family. And I remember just feeling so anxious, so panicked the entire time, and just sick to my stomach that he was around my kids. And I just couldn't take it, and I remember sitting there and looking at my babies and just being like, "I'm not this isn't right. I'm not protecting my kids right now." And I told my mom after that, that was it. I'm never gonna be around him again. My kids will never be around him again. This is not happening. I'm not this I so it took me standing up for my kids, really to stand up for myself before I had the strength to stand up for myself. It was one thing when somebody's kind of knocking me down, but when it comes to my kids, I was like, nope, we're not going to do that. So it really took me just looking at my children and being like, I don't want my children being around somebody like that. I don't want them to have to, be around anybody who would hurt them. And so that's really being able to stand up to my mom, to my family, and saying, no more, like, we're not doing family functions anymore. I'm not going to be a part of this. I'm not going to kind of do this. That's really, it was my kids. It was, seeing my kids and not wanting anything to happen to them.
Tracy, that's a beautiful part of your healing journey because your kids, they're the ones who taught you, like you said, the unconditional love. They're the ones who looked at you and saw you as mom. When people look at you, you think people see this bad person because of what happened to you. When in reality, you did nothing wrong. You were 9 years old at the time. And seeing your kids for beautiful babies and they're loving you and they're seeing you as mom, that was their turning point in your story. And I have a question to ask you regarding the family dynamic. So, when you look at your kids, you love them with all your heart, you want to protect them. It's this mom instinct that comes on. When it comes to your family and your own mom, and you remembering when you told her about what happened to you, is your relationship with your mom different now because of how she reacted to what you told her, knowing how you would react now if one of your kids told you that?
That's a great question. And I get that question a lot, just based on because of everything that happened within the family dynamic. And most people know family dynamics are just complicated in
Right.
general.
Mhm.
And our situation is very complicated. And I think it was really hard when I first disclosed to my mom, and even after a few years afterwards, I just kind of just took it internally and I was just like, maybe I am being a little crazy. Maybe I'm just being too dramatic. And maybe it wasn't a big deal. And it, like I said, it really wasn't until I met my husband and I had kids and I looked at my kids and I was like, no, like if anybody hurt my kids, if anybody did anything to my kids, I would go mama bear on them like so fast.
Mhm.
So, that began a hard time for me with in my relationship with my mom because it made me feel like was I not worth it enough to stick up for? Was I not, did she not love me enough to care enough to protect me? Whereas I look at my kids and I would, go
Right.
through the ends of the earth to keep my kids from something happening to them. So that was a very big struggle with her. And I think it goes back to and I talk a lot about this when I do my speaking engagement. Is it's a generational thing, you know generations of her generation was you don't talk about things, you just sweep it under the rug, you don't talk about it, bad things happen, you just keep on moving on. It's kind of that whole mindset that they have, and I think my mom was very much in that mindset of let's not talk about it, let's just pretend it never happened, move on.
Mhm.
And I was not there. I wanted to be like, no, like let's figure this out, I want to know what's going on, kind of thing. And that was a big struggle for us as well. And so being able to talk about it, was kind of difficult. And so it is a struggle with my mom. It's an up and down relationship. It's a struggle. We try, we work at it. But again, I have times where I'm like, she did the best she could, just like any mom tries, she did the best she could with what tools she had. Because I know she didn't grow up in a great household either. So things come down and they trickle down. And so I forgive her in a lot of ways for that. And then it's also hard because, I want the best for my kids and I keep an open, honest communication with them. And, sometimes it gets frustrating because it's like, why didn't I get that? But, you know, it's, it's a hard struggle. It's a hard struggle that it goes up and down. It goes up and down.
But it's so beautiful how compassionate you are. Now that you're a mom, you're able to forgive your mom and say, hey, like, I understand this is what you knew at the time, and you were doing what you thought was
Right.
best for me, even though it wasn't what was best for me, but you thought it was best for me. So I understand you and
Right.
I forgive you. And I think that's a beautiful
Absolutely.
and amazing and a part of your emotional healing journey.
Right. And I think it does become you once you become a mom, and it's not an easy job, and
Yeah.
you think like, "Oh, why couldn't my mom do this or do that?" And then you become a mom and you're like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." You just can't sometimes, or you make mistakes. Like I'm a totally not great mom sometimes, and I make mistakes all the time. So I do forgive my mom for a lot of the things she did because I do know what kind of, her parents were like. I do know what kind of background she grew up in. And so, yeah, she did the best she could with the way that she had things at that time. So, yeah, absolutely. You have to forgive people. Otherwise, everybody can't act the right way all the time. Like that's just not how you learn. That's not how you grow. And I have to make mistakes as well so I can figure out how to grow and become a better person. So, yeah, I feel like, there are times now I'm not saying I forgive her for everything, and
Mhm.
I feel like there are times I still hold on to things that I probably shouldn't.
Mhm.
Um, but I mean, I think that's just normal. I think that's a normal thing.
Thank you so much for sharing, Tracy. A little earlier in the conversation, you talked about suicide and substance abuse. At the VSC, we noticed that many of our survivors, they deal with suicidality and substance abuse as well as a result of their unresolved trauma. And we see this pattern often as this is a coping mechanism to avoid feelings and symptoms of the trauma. And you mentioned that you did turn to alcohol as a way to kind of get rid of these feelings. There's a way to feel. So, how was it that you were able to overcome these barriers and seek help during your time of need?
I think I did deal with some suicide issues and a lot of substance abuse in my days. And I think the biggest thing that it just took a long time. And then I think that's a lot of people, especially nowadays, we want things done like right away. We want it done like, okay, well, this has happened and let's fix it now. Like I want it to be done now. And it took a lot of patience and it took a long time to get there. And it was definitely a lot of work. Um, but I was very fortunate that I had people who were around me that actually cared for me even when I didn't care for myself. So I was very fortunate that I had people who, you know, wanted to see good things for me and wanted to protect me and wanted to be there for me, even when I didn't want to at all. I was at the lowest of the low. So I think that's a big part of it is just being able to, that luckily I had some people around me who were just kind of helping me out. I used alcohol. I think I probably started drinking around the age of like 13, just because that had been right after the abuse ended, and going into puberty and trying to figure
Mhm.
all of that out, and everything that had happened. I was so confused, and I had nowhere to turn or talk to, nobody to talk to or to explain what was going on or anything like that. And I turned to alcohol because it would dull that pain for a little while. It would dull the feelings, that I was feeling, and it would help me just kind of cope for that short period of time. And I remember, getting drunk for the first time, and I just remember being like, "Oh, I haven't felt like that free, that carefree in
Mhm.
such a long time." And I think that's when you are like a sexual assault victim, your innocence kind of gets stolen from you. Your freedom of just being able to feel kind of carefree gets taken. And you want to be able to find any way you can to feel that again. And it's really hard. And I think I definitely used alcohol to kind of help me feel that carefree of, just for a short time. I think I
Mhm.
definitely used it to hide when I was in social situations because I was very anxious,
Mhm.
that people could see what happened to me, and that's the biggest thing is people, you just look at people and you're like, oh, please don't see the real me. Don't see who I really am. You won't like me. And so you use things to hide. You use drugs, you use alcohol, you use all kinds of things to hide. And I definitely did that, and to try to get through my years. And I definitely got into a lot of bad relationships because I didn't think, I would deserve great love or deserve somebody to treat me well. And when I was 21, I got into a relationship with a guy who was an alcoholic and he was abusive. And it got to a very low point with me because having just all of it go on in my head, I got to when I was about 21, and he was just very verbally abusive. And I actually told him about my story. I
Mhm.
told him what happened to me. And I remember when he would get drunk, he would throw it back in my face. And he would say, "You wanted it to happen. It was your fault it happened." And this was coming from somebody who was supposed to love me, who said they loved me and who said they cared about me. And it really just kind of dug me deeper into a hole. And it was there that couldn't, I just couldn't figure out how to deal with anything that was going on anymore. I wasn't, going to a therapist. I hadn't told anybody really what was going on. So it got bad, and I ended up trying to commit suicide. And I tell people about that because, as suicide rates are just rising, unfortunately. And people don't, a lot of people don't understand, like, how could you do that? Why could you do that? How do you think about that kind of thing? And a lot of it is for me is I didn't want to die. I think that's the biggest thing that people don't understand with suicide is it's not that we want to die. It's just we don't know how to deal with the pain anymore. Like we are so tired of dealing with the pain and the emotions and the feelings that it just gets overwhelming, and we don't see any other way that it's going to stop. Like we've dealt with it for so long. We've tried things and it's nothing's making it better. And I just got to a point where, because I was dating him, he was isolating me from my family, from my friends. So I really didn't have anybody else at the time that I could turn to except him. And here he was telling me that it was all my fault. So it was a really hard struggle mentally, and I just didn't know anywhere else to turn, anything else to do. And so it was a dark time, and it still, even after that suicide attempt, it still took years until I was finally ready to go and see a therapist and talk about it and go through it. And I think that's one of the things, like, people don't understand is, like, it was years of, trying to still get through this and still say, well, it's okay, everything's fine. And it just took a while. And like I said, it really wasn't until my kids came along that
Hmm.
I wanted to be better for my kids, that I wanted to be better, this better mom, this better person for my kids. And that's really when I started to go to therapy. And to this day, and I tell my husband this all the time, if it wasn't for my kids, I don't know if I'd still be here. I really don't know. I don't know if I could have made it this long without having them, because, they are my purpose.
Right.
So I think they're the reason I overcome my barriers. They're
Mhm.
the reason I want to be better. So that's where it comes from, is from my kids and wanting to just be better for my kids. And so to break that cycle for them, to see that the next cycle is, we're not going to just sweep it under the rug and move on. We're going to talk about it and try to get through it together.
Wow. That was a lot. I'm like processing. I'm feeling everything that you're telling me. I'm like, wow. So from 9 to 21, you didn't tell anyone. And when you finally did tell someone, he threw it back in your face. So the
Yes.
like you were saying, the pain that you were feeling, it was just so intense because not only your family, I'm sure they didn't intentionally mean to invalidate you, but that's how you felt. And then on top of this person who was supposed to love you and that you loved, this person is also invalidating you. And oftentimes, when someone's experiences have been invalidated, the emotions and feelings that they have towards a situation sometimes feel inappropriate. So, you questioning yourself, you thinking about yourself as this bad person, like them telling you that you shouldn't be feeling this way. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was a big deal. So, what did your journey look like in reconnecting with yourself and connecting with your emotions and feelings?
So, yeah, that's a big question,
Yeah.
because that's a hard one with emotions and feelings. To somebody who's been through a traumatic experience is really hard. And I think I'm still learning about trauma. I'm still learning about everything that happened to me and how it has affected me, like, still now to this day. So I think it's the emotions and feelings, are like a roller coaster, and not having to, for so long, stuff down those feelings of, anger, scared, confused, guilt, everything that I was feeling, having to just stuff those down and be like, it wasn't a big deal. It's not a big deal. It numbs you. It really honestly numbs you. And, you begin to, your brain, in order to deal with the trauma, in order to get past that trauma, it goes into survival mode. And what it does is it just kind of numbs your brain and numbs the senses so that you can survive. And that's really what happened with me, is being able to understand the feelings that I had. And I never really let myself feel. And that was the other thing. Not letting myself feel hurt, not letting myself feel anger, not letting myself feel those things for so long. And I think it took a long time to get there. And I think even now, it's kind of funny with my husband when we have arguments or disagreements or whatever, and he'll do, something silly, like a normal spouse does,
Mhm.
to upset me. Sometimes I don't know how I feel, because I don't know emotions very well.
Mhm.
I have to just kind of sit there and I'm like, am I mad? Am I supposed to be angry? Am I supposed to be happy? Or do I let this go? Is this a big deal or not a big deal? Like I can't differentiate between big emotions and small emotions and what I should let go and what I shouldn't let go. And so I really had to work a lot with a therapist on talking about being able to feel like I could express my needs and being able to express my feelings in a positive way. And I used to do it when my husband and I were first married, is I would just not tell him things when things would bother me. And then I would just keep it down and I would just, stuff it down, stuff it down, stuff it down. And then what happened is I would just explode
Mhm.
because I couldn't take it anymore and I couldn't handle it. And then I would explode. And then I would be bringing up things that happened like 4 months ago. And my husband's like, why didn't you tell me 4 months ago that I didn't take out the trash and that made you mad? And I'm like, I don't know, but it did. So,
Uh-huh.
it was, and it's silly things like that I would just be like, no, don't say anything. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to upset somebody. Your feelings don't matter. So just keep it to yourself. And it was a really hard thing to be able to work with a therapist and say, okay, this is a normal emotion that you're having and it is an okay emotion. You are entitled to have that emotion and that is completely fine. And I think just being able to validate and even having my husband go with me to a therapist and explain to him and a therapist, like, this is what I feel when you do certain situations. When this happens, this is how it makes me feel. Whether or not he 100% probably didn't even mean to upset me or do something wrong, but it's just one of those things that I had just been my brain had just gone through the survival mode for so long that I'm just used to doing it. And so it really took a long time, a lot of like journaling, writing down. I remember if my husband and I got into disagreements, I would say, okay, wait, I need a minute. And I would have to go and write down what I was feeling, anger, like just write down everything that was in my head and then reread it and be like, well, that sounds like anger. That sounds like you're hurt. That sounds like you're scared. That sounds like, what, and try to figure out those emotions because it still just takes me a really hard time to figure out what emotion I am actually feeling. And that's what a lot of times a lot of people who've gone through a traumatic experience, it's really hard. Like you can't your emotions are all over the place and it's really hard to figure out what exactly you're feeling.
Wow. So, Tracy, what I'm getting out of that and what you're saying is trauma is never forgotten, nor does it go away. Throughout your healing
No.
journey, your abuse happened when you were 9, and you've done a lot of work to build a life worth living. What would you say is your next step in your healing journey?
So, first of all, I would always say, I've heard this quote like so many times, but it's so true, is healing is not linear.
Mhm.
Like it is never linear. So, you think you've gotten past like these big, huge, moments and events, and I've gone to therapy and I've done my work and I've read books and I've journaled and I've talked to people and I've, expressed my feelings and so you think like, oh, I'm good now, but it's definitely I still have good days and I still have really bad days. And I have to accept that that's going to happen. These are the things that are going to just kind of stay with me. And some days I'm going to be able to do really well with things. And then some days I'm going to have to struggle and that's okay. But I think I have to just recognize like certain triggers for me. What are the certain things that will kind of send me into those kind of feelings and emotions that I'm normally used to having, and recognizing that and being able to say, okay, I this is what's happening. This is this is what I'm feeling. Whether it's certain movies, it's whether it's certain songs on the radio, whether it's certain places, um, you know, whatever the case may be, just knowing those certain triggers that have affected me in the past, just
Mhm.
knowing, okay, how do I approach those? How do I get through those when those pop up? Like, what do I, make sure to do? And, keeping myself healthy and keeping myself like still going to a therapist, still talking about things. And honestly, sharing my story has been a big, huge part of my healing journey. Being able to share my story with people kind of gives me that power back that we've been talking about, is that
Yeah.
power of
Mhm.
over my story, over my life. For so long, I felt so powerless over these things that happened to me. And I felt, shame and guilt and everything else. And being able to share my story when I want to, the things that I want to, it just kind of really it gave me more of a strength inside to
Mhm.
kind of be like, yep, this happened to me, but I'm owning it and I'm going to do something good with it. I'm going to turn it into something good. And, being able to get to that point is a huge point for me. Just because, like I said, it takes that power back and it just makes me feel like I have a little bit more control and I can use this how I want to use it. So I think that's probably where I am in my healing journey, being able to share my story and just hopefully it'll help others, maybe share their story or feel better about where they are in their lives.
Tracy, you're doing an amazing job at doing that. Can I just say, you're here on this
Aw.
podcast. On top of that, for our listeners, Tracy does trainings all the time and she talks about her trauma. She talks about it with police officers, and I'm sure she talks about it with different groups of people. So, that part of her healing journey, Tracy, I am validating it because you are amazing and you are an example of a survivor who is taking back her power. And it's so beautiful to see. And I'm honored to be in your presence as well. I do want
Oh,
to say
you're so sweet. You're very sweet. Thank you.
that. Tracy, so you did say that your sons, they are the ones that give you a purpose in life. They're the ones who showed you unconditional love. So from your child sexual abuse, has this influenced your parenting style in any way, considering that you have two sons?
Yes, absolutely. It has completely influenced my parenting style. And I would say um, it has really shaped who I am as a parent and who I want to be as a parent. With my parents, there wasn't a whole lot of open communication. There
Mhm.
wasn't a whole lot of discussion about things like, I couldn't go to my mom and talk to her about, well, obviously about this, and I couldn't talk to her about, just normal puberty, normal things, that was happening in my life. And I wanted to make sure that I had a more open relationship with my boys. And so from a very early age, I started talking to them about their bodies and I started talking to them about body parts and who can touch their body parts. And, just making sure that we always are checking in and having these conversations that are so important. Um, that has been a huge part of my parenting style. And, even still, my kids are, 15 and 13, and my friends joke with me all the time because they're just like, your kids tell you everything. And I'm like, yes, they do. They do because I have worked really hard because I want them to feel like they
Mhm.
don't have to keep secrets from me. They don't have to, think that they're going to get into trouble if they don't tell me something. Obviously they're not going to tell me everything, but they're going
Mhm.
to, I'm hoping they're going to tell me the important stuff, the stuff that they really, need to. And we talk a lot about, sexual assault and sexual abuse and them being boys about when they start dating, what's appropriate and what you shouldn't do and what you can do. And we talk a lot about that. And we also talk a lot about mental health and mental issues because I deal with anxiety and depression. My youngest son deals with anxiety. My older son has some issues. And so in our house, we talk a lot about mental health issues and how to make yourself feel better. And we're very open and honest and saying, you know what, I'm not having a good mental day. And there's been definitely times where I've let my kids stay at home from school because mentally they're just drained and they need a break. Whereas I remember being, when I was going to school, oh, you went to school every day, no matter what. You were sick, go to school. It's like you doesn't
Mhm.
matter. You're not feeling good. Oh well, go to school. So, but I want it to be a priority for them that, you have to take care of your mental health too. You can't just keep plugging on and going on. It's going to take a toll. And I don't want them to get into a situation where, I was hiding feelings and things like that. I want them to be able to express that if they're feeling sad, if they're feeling hurt, if they're feeling, anxious or tired or whatever the case may be, I want them to be able to feel like they can talk about those kind of things and not have to hold them in, especially with being boys. I think, people have this, thing, well, boys are supposed to be tough and, hard and not supposed to cry and this and that. And, I want them to be able to feel like, you know what, if you're sad, be sad. If you feel like you need to cry, go ahead and cry. Like, it's okay. So I definitely think it has really shaped who I am as a parent. And hopefully I will one day break the mold of that, whole cycle. And, maybe one day when they get to be a parent, that they will even do better than me.
I do want to say a couple of things, Tracy. One, you have a beautiful, supportive, gentle parenting style where you've created this safe space for your two boys so that if something were to happen, they're not running and telling their friends, they're telling their mom, someone who
Right.
loves them unconditionally and who wants what's best for them, which is amazing. The second thing that I want to say is considering how young they are, do they know your story?
That's a good question. So yes, my kids actually know my story, and I have been like I said, going back and being open and honest with them about my mental health struggles. I tell them I've always kind of told them about my anxiety and my depression. They've always kind of known, just because, like I said, my youngest son deals with anxiety. My older son has ADHD, so he's dealt with it. So we've all been to therapy several times in our
Okay.
household. So we have all been very open about it. I did talk to my kids, like I said, I've talked to them since they were little about their body and who can touch it and things like that, and what to happen if somebody touches your body. So those conversations have always been had. And I probably, when they got to, maybe like fourth, fifth grade, even sixth grade, I began having the telling them the stories about what happened to me. And obviously, I did it at an age appropriate thing. And as they've gotten older, they sometimes still have questions. And as they get older, their questions get more in depth, like, so as we go along, they find out more and more things. But I have been very open and honest with them because when my kids were younger, they weren't allowed to do a lot of sleepovers, and they weren't allowed to go places without me or my husband a lot of the times. And I, instead of just being like, that's just because that's the way I want it, I wanted to tell them, listen, this is why I'm worried. This is why I don't want you to do that. Because, you know, if you tell kids don't do it, that's just because I say don't do it, then they're going to wonder, and then they're going to be like, well, maybe I should do it. Let's see what happens. And so I wanted to give them the reason why I said, no, you can't go to that sleepover because this is why, da 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 da. So yeah, they know my story. And like I said, as they get older, more details come out, and I give them a little bit more here and there, depending on what I feel like they can handle and what they want to know. But yeah, so they know, just because I want them to be aware that things like this can happen. And I'm not gonna kind of sugarcoat things, that we live in this bubble and nothing ever bad happens. I want them to know that, you have to be protected and you have to be mindful of things that can happen to you.
You are breaking a generational pattern in a sense. Not in a sense, you are, because it ends with you. Because now, when your sons, when they get married and when they have kids, they're going to say, this is what my mom did. And this was so healthy. And this is what
Right.
supported me. And I want to share this with my kids. I want to teach them the importance of boundaries. I want to teach them from an early age who can touch them, who can't touch them. And when it comes to sleepovers, this is actually a third thing that I want to say. That stuck out to me a lot because when I was younger, my mom as well, she didn't let me have sleepovers when I was probably from 5, I would say, to 12. And I never understood why. She would just say, well, if there's a guy in the house, I don't want you to be there. And in my head, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, I don't understand this. I'm young. And now that you said that, it just like a switch kind of went on where now I understand why she was saying that. Maybe she experienced something. Maybe her sisters experienced something that happened that she doesn't want to happen with me. The only difference is that she didn't communicate that with me, so I didn't know. But as soon as you said that, a switch just went on, and it's like, wow, now I get it. Now I
Yeah.
understand my mom's perspective.
Right. And I tell people when I speak to parents if I'm speaking my story to parents and I tell them you have to be open and talk to them about these situations and what is going on because kids have questions. And just because you say no, don't do that, what's the first thing when you say no, do that? And they're like, wait, do I want to do that? I feel like I want to do that now. And so I always made sure of, well, I mean, because I know I was that kid. My parents said, don't do that. I'm gonna be like, I think I'm gonna try that now. And so I was definitely that kid. So I made sure when I was a parent, when I became a parent and talking to my kids, I would give them a reason why. Don't just say no, don't do it. Give them a reason why so they understand and they're not just like my mom's just being all crazy and overprotective. Like your mom said she was protecting you, she was trying to protect you, but you didn't know why.
I didn't know why.
And you were very confused. And it's just not until this point where you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's a long time for you to go to be like, not why was I not allowed to do that? And so yeah, it's like that's a big thing is I tell parents all the time is, tell them why you're not letting them do things. Or even now when like my kids, they go someplace, they have to tell me who's going to be there.
Right.
Where are they going to go? Who's going to be around? What's going to happen? Like I go through all of these scenarios and things with them because I want to know, in case something comes up. Because if they say, oh, we're going to a movie, okay, that's great. Well, let me give you some what if situations to make sure you know how to get out of things if you get into a problem. And I think that's as parents, we have to make sure we do that. Like, yeah, it's a generational thing. And I want to hopefully break that cycle that has been going on for years and years and years. And just like a lot of people who are my age and your age, we're trying to break those cycles. And I hope I can make it better for my kids. And then I hope they will make it even better for their kids. Like, I'm sure I didn't do everything right. I'm never going to do everything right. So hopefully, yeah, they'll like learn from it and be like, okay, this is why my mom was so, overprotective, or this is why my mom did this and that.
But the good thing is that you're communicating with them. And you've all, like your friends say, your kids tell you everything. So just from that statement alone, I can tell, and I just from observing like how you are as an individual, your kids are going to be so like when as they get older, they're going to be like, I had a really great mom. Not I have a really great mom. She's amazing,
I
and
hope
she's
so. I'm sure if you ask them right now, depending on the day, we'll see what happens. Like my older one, they'll be like,
it
she's
happens.
all
No.
right.
They're young now. They're 13 and 15. But even now, like
Yeah.
I'm relatively still young. I'm only 22. But as I kind of reflect and as I talk to different people, I'm like, my mom, she did that because that was what was best for me at the time. And I didn't understand it at the time when I was 13 or 15. But now I do. And now I get it. And I'm honestly so grateful for the decisions that she made back when I was younger. And I'm telling you, when they get older, they're going to think the same thing.
I know. I tell them that all the time. I'm like, when you're older, you'll get it.
My
And they
mom
just
used
look
to
at
say
me
that too.
like,
And now I'm like, okay,
yeah,
you're
I
right.
know. I know. I know. I know. So yeah, it's funny. So yeah, it's just depends on the day. They're like, yeah, mom's cool. Or sometimes they're like, mom is just really over the top. So either way, I'm okay with.
Okay, Tracy. So the last question that I have for you today is, on behalf of your own healing, what was the most impactful part of your journey that helped you get to where you are today? How did you show up for yourself?
That's a good question. The most impactful part of my journey, I think, was being a mom. I know I've said it like several times,
Keep saying
but
it. That's
that really
okay.
for me,
Mhm.
yeah, that really was my turning point of my life, being able to have these precious little babies just look
Mhm.
at me and just know that they just relied on me, they needed me, they loved me, I mean, they were just always wanting to be around me and with me, and that was just such an impactful moment. I remember just thinking at that point, okay, I've got to get my stuff together because these kids need me. I want to be a better mom for these kids. I want to be a better person to have these kids, for these kids to be around. Like I don't want to be sad all the time. I don't want to be anxious all the time. I don't want to be, worried about this or that. I want to make sure that I'm better for my kids. And I think that was the ultimate part of my journey that helped me get to where I am. And then also having my husband by my side has been huge for me. He is, I say this about him all the time but he is my rock. He is my, my steady rock. We joke because, he is a guy's guy. So he doesn't have a whole lot of emotions. So I like joke with him and I'm like, you have none and I have all. So together we just balance each other out. So it works really well, but it is nice to he does, he loves me 100%. He understands me. He gets me, he lets me feel what I need to feel. He doesn't, diminish whatever I'm feeling, he really just truly wants me to be healthy and happy and be okay. And I think having him to kind of just play off of and be like, listen, this is how I'm feeling. What does that mean? Or how do I help? What do I do? And how I'm feeling this. And, even if days that I just have a bad day, and I can text him and just be like, listen, today is not a good day. Like I'm just going to take to the bed today and we're okay, and that is it. And he's okay with that, and he lets me be there, and he just was like, just I'll take care of it. I'll, whatever, no worries. So I really think between my kids and my husband, that's really how I show up for myself. I know that's kind of bad. It should be something internally for me, but I mean, if I'm honest, that's what it is. It's knowing that my kids need me every single day, and knowing that I want to show them a better mom, a better parent.
And I'm so glad that you have that support system around you and your husband and your kids. And Tracy, today, this podcast, this recording has been absolutely wonderful. You've shared so many insights into your healing journey. And even though, like you said, it's not linear, you're still getting better every day. You're still becoming a better mom every single day. And most importantly, you're still healing, growing, and learning every single day. So I want to thank you so much for taking your valuable time to sit here with me and to do this, Tracy. It means the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I love sharing my story. And like I said, hopefully if somebody's out there listening and, they've been through something similar or they're feeling something similar, just the whole idea that, there's good days and bad days, today may be a bad day, but tomorrow's going to be okay day. So, we just try to keep going and keep working one foot in front of the other.
Thank you, Tracy, for sharing that. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free, confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. The views and opinions expressed by podcast participants are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. This podcast content is made available for informational and educational purposes, and the VSC does not make any representation or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the content. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And stop sharing.